Welcome to episode 4. Everything that I'm doing really with these videos is, if you notice, I'm not reading off a script or I'm not reading anything really. I'm just linking up with my higher mind, bringing my higher mind down to and bringing that knowledge down in this moment. The fingers closed like this helps you to, what spiritualists call, ground yourself. But basically it's centering yourself in the Christ. Because as you know, the Christ is the centre of our being. So when we focus ourselves and we talk from the Christ, from within. I would like to. There are some messages, I think, really some understandings that have been given to me, which I should give to you. But I need you to understand where I come from and why I come from the position that I come from. So in order to do that, I would have to talk about my history. So my history is about my spiritual experiences, really. And I have to be, I mean, there's millions, maybe for thousands, I'm not sure. But there are some main experiences that I've had which have defined, which defines me, I think, or helps me define myself in my now moment. So the if we're on a timeline, and we're experiencing a timeline, there's certain nodes along those timelines that have been fixed. So there is a moment. I think really where it all began for me really was at a relationship breakdown in around about 1992. And I was very young, and it just it crippled me mentally, because I lost a son there. Well, I'm not saying that I lost that the son died, but I looked after a son, and my son, what I thought was my son, for a very long period of time, and then it just, my whole world collapsed really when I found out he wasn't my son. There was more to it than that, but it was the breakdown really of everything, and it caused me to ask a question, a fundamental question. I remember pausing and thinking to myself, I need this answer, otherwise I'm not moving forward. I'm just going to ask this question. And the question really was about God, was because I felt that my life was, at that time anyway, my life was really a point of great suffering. And that's why I wanted to know the answer. I needed to know that there was a plan, if you like, or a divinity, or something behind everything. I needed to know that question. So I asked that question. A medium at that time said to me that if I ask a question, I'll be answered in 7 days. And sure enough, I was answered in 7 days. Quite simply put. I did come back after 7 days, and I said to God, this was the question that I initially asked. I said, if there is an all-knowing God, all-knowing, infinite being, then that infinite being would be able to answer me, because that infinite being, by its very nature, is aware of me, my insignificant, my tiny self that I am. It would still be aware that I was asking this question. If it wasn't, then it wouldn't be an infinite being. See the reasoning? So I said, right, so this is the question. I want you to prove yourself, and I will give you 7 days in order to do it. But you have to prove that you exist to me in a completely, I forget what the word is now, but in a completely incontrovertible way. So I have no doubts. Now, after 7 days, I did admit to myself, after 7 days, coming back down to that central question, I thought to myself, do you know what, I've been answered. But then I doubted myself. I thought to myself, it's not really the divine that I'm doubting now, but I doubt myself that I've been able to perceive it correctly. That I might have been just seeing into things, situations that and there was no meaning in those situations, but I was just seeing the meaning. So I gave it another challenge, and I gave it another 7 days, and then the unbelievable coincidences and synchronicities that happened in that next 7 days was phenomenal. And I had to come to the point after the 7 days, I had to openly admit that I now know that there is a divinity, that it is. Um, and that was really important for me because that allowed me then to begin my life again, to begin, and then along with that, then um, I had an experience. Because I remember I was working in a steelworks at the time, and in the steelworks, I kept on seeing in my mind, like my guide was saying to me, you could be going up to the spiritualist church and be teaching. And I thought to myself, there is no way on this earth. I've never set foot into a spiritualist church really. I think it was twice I think I maybe had really, so it's very limited experience. And I kept on receiving this. Anyway, I'd come along, it was a Thursday it was, and I started, there was a hill in my town, and there was a spiritualist church at the top of the hill. I remember walking, I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to put down a challenge to Spirit. I'm going to say to my guide, I'm going to say, if you can prove to me, by the time I get from where I am, which I was at the bottom of the hill, to the top of the hill, that I am to teach, I will teach. So, I did feel a little bit smug, I must admit, because when I started that walk up that hill, I started thinking to myself, well, this is going to be a hell of a job for him, to be able to prove that by the time I get to the top. And I reached the handle of the church door, the spiritualist church door, and I remember thinking to myself, well, they didn't do it, did they? And then I opened the door, and this church was packed full. I never forget that because it was the only time I ever seen that church full, ever. And there were people in between the aisles, and there was a medium. I remember her name, Sophie. I think her name was Sophie Baldwin, actually. And she was walking up the centre of the church, and she was saying, she was going to each person, will you take the church tonight? Will you take the church tonight? The next person, will you take the church tonight? And I thought, oh my goodness. I felt that feeling of when the hairs stand up all over your body, and, and it was like, my mind was filled, with the presence of Spirit. And I just felt, oh my goodness, I've got to keep my word. I've got to keep my word, because I remember saying, that was another promise that I'd made whilst I recovered and started living again. I told myself that I would always be honest, or as honest as I possibly can be in every given moment. I remember thinking that. So I had to be honest with it. So she came to me and I said, yeah, I'll take the church tonight. And do you know what? I did take that church tonight, and I thought I knew nothing about spiritualists at that time. I must have been about 24. And I stood up, and it felt like, I never forget the feeling, it felt like the back of my mind, a door opened. And I had all the knowledge. Well, at first I didn't have any knowledge, and I was thinking to myself, and then it was this idea that I should just tell them about my experience. My experience of my collapse, I suppose, and of my experience there and my regeneration. And I spoke about that. I spoke about all of the things that I'd learned. Well, I remember at the end of that, everyone gave me a standing ovation. And that's really, that was a moment, that was, because I realised that the internal world is connected, my internal experiences were connected to the external world, and that the internal experiences that you receive are able to influence those things that you consider to be the external world. Other experiences began to unfold from that moment. I had an experience. I mean, there's lots of millions of experiences. For example, the book and the spirit Silver Birch was influencing me at that time. You know, the Native American. My guide was the Native American, so he was experiencing. He was teaching as well. The I had also a Chinese influence that was happening at the time. And I remember I had a girlfriend at the time, and we were sat there meditating, just an ordinary meditation, nothing was expected. And all of a sudden I felt this Chinese influence, and it came into my body. And I felt like it merged with me for a moment. And then I felt elevated. I felt like as if, and this was a strange one, I've never had this experience before or after. I felt that there was like, almost like smoke or vapour that was around me, and I felt myself elevated. Almost immediately, I felt myself come back down again then. And my girlfriend at the time, she was looking at me and she said, I said, why are you looking like that? And she went, because for a moment, you'd been up, your body was, you had been elevated, and I could see mist around you. Well, that was the first, that was another experience. This really gave me the introduction, I think, to transmediumship, because I had other experiences then. I swear nobody's had these type of experiences, but I had these. I seen a gentleman walking. We were in town. I hadn't had a drink. I think I'd had one pint, and I was going home, and I seen this gentleman, and I seen a light around his head. And that's another experience that I've had. I've seen, when I see this light, it normally means that I have to communicate with that individual. It's almost as if it's the spirit world's sign to me that I have to do something. I have to. So I walked over to him, and I began speaking to him. And I remember asking permission. You know, that's one of the things that I always do if I'm ever working with anybody. I always say, is it okay if I do this? And then you can make a decision along the way. So I'm giving the person, if you like, the who's receiving the message full control. Because it is them, it's for them, and they can say no, yes, or so. And then one minute I was in town centre in the city that I live, and then another moment then, or city centre, and then another moment then I was, well, by the place I lived, and I noticed that the spirit, the Chinese gentleman had come out of my body, and I noticed this stranger walking away. And I realised quickly what had happened, but I wasn't 100% sure, so I said to the stranger, I said, was you aware of a Chinese gentleman then talking to me? Oh yeah, they said, yeah, that's happened for the last half hour, you walked me home, walked me down to here. And then, so that was an experience. I had another experience very similar to that as well. So that gave me the insight to transmediumship. And then I began, then when I met I met a lady who was to be the mother of my children, you know, and there was another individual that I experienced in terms of the transmediumship, and she used to be like, these people I call Chan, and I call Luigi, which is the other spirit that used to come work with me, teaching me, was, they're called spirit helpers. They come to me, there's no obligation to help me, but they just want to. They feel drawn to me and I to them, maybe because our vibrational frequencies are the same. Possibly, I think mostly that's what it is, to be fair. And then her name, well, first of all, Chan was just a gentleman, you know, a Chinese gentleman that had, I was to have an experience with him. So this is another important experience. I remember I used to keep a diary. I've always written diaries. I've always have. And I had a diary, and I remember I felt really depressed. It was, I think it was, I think it was a Saturday, but I know the year it was 1998, and I think it was the latter end of 1998. Um, and I was there in my room at the time, and I was thinking to myself, I could see the number 3, and it was like my inner voice was saying, "You'll do this 3 times." And I did draw a parallel to that experience. That even at that moment, I thought that's very much like when Paul denied. Was it not? It wasn't Paul. Was it that one of the apostles denied Christ 3 times, and the cock crowed? Something that resonated in my mind there when Spirit, or that quiet voice within me, said, "You'll deny this 3 times." And what what happened was, I had this feeling, I had this thought transference, whatever it was, that said, "Sit down, Craig, and put your feet up on a cushion." Now, I never put my feet up on a cushion at that time. Why would a young man do that, you know? And I thought, I feel awful. I need to do some writing, and I ignored that voice, that quiet inclination. That's what it was, more than a voice. And I went into my other room to do a bit of writing, finding that I couldn't do the writing, and I come back. And then it was like that voice, that quiet voice within me was saying, "That's the first time that you denied it." And then I was there in front, and again that quiet voice saying, or that remembrance of there, saying, "You've got to sit down and put your feet up on the cushion." And I remember thinking to myself, let's do some spiritual writing, let's go back in there. And I did it again. And then I come back out, and I was like, and they said, "That's the second time that you denied it." And then the third one, then I was just about to do it again, and then and then that, again, I knew then, I thought to myself, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe that, I just done that 3 times." So, and then I gave into it. I thought, why not? What have I got to lose? What have I got to lose? Just sit down on the sofa, just put your feet up on the coffee table, put the pillow underneath your feet, and just sit there. So I did that, and I was thinking, well, nothing's happening. And then you look within. This is one of the processes that I've come to understand, is that um, the process is, I think you have to do everything within your means and power to be able to make something right, to do something properly. Yeah, to make something right. I think now you have to do everything in your power to be able to do that. And you should lean to yourself as well, because you can achieve anything without believing in yourself, believing in your own ability to be able to discern the right path or not. So I remember thinking to myself, right, okay, what do I do next? And I looked down, and there was the Bible, King James Bible, by the side of me. And I opened it up randomly, and it fell on the Gospel of St. John. And then it was like, I got to pick this Bible up now, and I got to look at it. And then I thought, I've got to. And as soon as I started to think, I've got to read this, I felt a physical door open. But I knew it wasn't a physical door, because the sound of the door opened right in front of me, and right in front of me was essentially a brick wall. And then I felt a presence come close to me, walk towards me. And I sort of felt I knew who this was, yeah? It was Yeshua, or Jesus, as some people call him, Emmanuel, yeah, different names of the same being. And he was stood there, and I was like, is this? And I was looking at the Bible, and I was looking at Gospel of St. John, and I was looking at the first words, and I began to read. The presence of the divine came to me through Jesus. The light was so overpowering. Our beloved brother came into this world perfect, complete, ascended. Before he even came to this world, he was an ascended being. And he was the only ascended being that's ever entered the physical form. I tell you the truth. He's a wonderful, wonderful human being. Full of love, full of compassion. And he read to me. Well, he didn't read to me, no. I read, and completely and utterly synchronized with my words, he spoke. Physical words. And we spoke and read the Gospel of St. John. And that's why I know that the Gospel of St. John is the most perfect book that's ever been written. All until the last, I think, page and a half. The last page and a half of the Gospel of St. John is a manipulation. But all of the rest of it is true. And he revealed to me, step by step, the inner truth of the book of the Gospel of St. John. Wonderful. I feel all of these tears that I experience sometimes, like this, is joy. It's the expression of joy, although it does seem to be like an expression of pain, doesn't it? He was the living embodiment of the Christos. Praise be to the divine. Because the world itself, as you look into the world, it often reflects you. Does it not? When you see people angry, you see people jealous, you see people inflamed, you see people sad, they're just a reflection of you in that moment. Say to yourself, we should transform the whole of reality for humanity. We shall transform the whole of reality of humanity from a universal experience of suffering into a universal experience of joy. We shall expand. We shall expand the wonderful, wonderful light. And we should do all of this together, all of us. And we shall be as Jesus is. Can you hear my dog in the background? He's sleeping. He's making a noise whilst he sleeps. Doesn't often do that. But that was an experience that happened there. And that was one of the major turning points in my life. And then I met a lady and we had 3 children. and in 2002, 2001, 2000, round about that period of time, I wrote a book called Ambrosia, and I channeled it. And then in I'm not quite sure when it was, 2011, it was that I entered into a communication by writing. I'd ask a question, I would write an answer, and I'd write a question, I would receive an answer. And I began communicating with the dreamwalkers. Extraterrestrial, interdimensional beings. First of all, it was actually what began first was a conversation with God, which surprised me because I always believed that God was this. God expressed himself through all things. That he wasn't an individual spirit in a sense as an individual being, but that he existed in all things at all times. That type of idea. But I had an experience that changed that. It sort of said, yes, that does exist. That God, that the nature of God is that, yes, but not only that. I began to have an experience with a being who called himself the Infinite One, the Divine, the Source, and he communicated in an individual way. I say he, but beyond gender really, but I'm just using the word he. And he said to me, really, he said, I had a question. I had a question about humanity and the history of humanity, because I kept on receiving experiences. Let me just explain something to you. About 6 months before, I was sat down in my living room at the time, and I had an experience. I know the experience when spirit is all around me, and when the spirit's in my environment, when it comes into me, I understand that experience. This was like that experience, but it wasn't quite. There was a feeling of almost, I'm going to say, artificial light in the room. And I wasn't perceiving it through my physical senses. I was experiencing it through the third eye. But, I mean, the experiences that I have with the third eye is equal to my experiences in physical reality, and perhaps even more real, in a sense. So I actually call that type of experience. I have these experiences where, like, for example, I said about seeing a light around someone's head, or I call it hyper-reality. When I enter that state of being, when I experience hyper-reality, it's when my senses, all 5 of my physical senses, are really alive and awake. And my other spiritual senses are awake also. So I entered into this experience of hyper-reality. And and there was 3 greys. I hate that word, but that's how I seen them at the time. I didn't have any word to, I'd seen them that. And they said, we will return in 6 months. And then the experience just went away. And I remember thinking to myself, I had a remembrance. I had a remembrance that when I was a child, I'd had a very similar experience. And I remember as a child having that experience with the extraterrestrials, the greys. Yeah. And thinking to myself, who are they? When I was a child, I thought, who are they? Who are they? What are they? I remember my guide saying, they're the Watchers. They've been called by ancient human beings, ancient civilizations, as the Watchers. Anyway, the experience went away, and I come back 6 months later. I had this communication with the divine, and I asked the divine, and I said, because I kept on having this downloaded information into my from my spirit mind into my physical mind, and kept on having all this information. So I asked God. I asked him. I said, what is this, these experiences that I've been having, this knowledge of humanity's history? What is humanity's history? And he said to me very clearly, he said, I can answer that, Craig. I can answer that. But I prefer to get other people involved in the process. So there is a species that was there at the time in humanity's history. That species wants to communicate the truths, the history of humanity to you. And I was like, right, okay. Back in 2011, this was. I was right, okay, 2010, 2011. Okay. And I put my hand on the keyboard, and all of a sudden, boom, I'm into hyper reality. And the information and the dreamwalkers are there, and they communicate with me through thought transference. Thought transference, I use that word rather than telepathy, because telepathy, it makes me think telepathy is something which is like the transference of words, language. This wasn't that. This was direct experience being translated for, thought transference. And then they began, and that's where the Phoenix Rising book really began, really, because. And it began, and they said to me, there was a species, Craig, they said, and I think I'll come forward now and speak in the now tense. There is a species that existed on the physical frequency in the past. They existed when the dinosaurs were here. And they were of the descent of the crocodilian. Yeah. Now, I expect I've got a very simple mind, but that's how I translate that to be, the crocodilian line. And they said, but this species was humanoid, existed on this planet before humanity ever came here or ever began evolving here. And they continued, and they evolved and evolved and evolved and became spacefaring. And I'm like, right, okay, what comes next? A prophecy was made. There are other species in this universe who are called elders. Now, a human being, there are some human beings on this planet that has managed to ascend through the matrix. They experienced ascension. And that is the destiny of every human being on this planet, is to ascend. This is to give clarity on this whole process, because there's so much misunderstanding that's going on over the internet and videos and things like this. So it is, again, I'll just repeat that, it is the destiny and the destination, and it will happen that humanity, every single individuality of humanity will ascend. Now, there are some species that have gone through this spiritual ascendance, and they have ascended as a species. The dreamwalkers are one of them, but there are other species. And there was a prophecy made by the elders species, and they said that humanity will be the next ascended race. Now, at the time, humanity really hadn't even begun. Now, this crocodilian race, I needed to put a name to it. because I needed to define it, label it, so for my own understanding. So I gave them the name, the Tababaclassians. The Tababaclassians. Try and say that with a mouthful of peanuts and a pint of cider, you'll have a job. But there we are. And that they grew, and they really didn't like that prophecy at all, because the prophecy was like, for them, the way they were perceiving the prophecy was like, a species that haven't even yet evolved on this planet is going to be the ones that ascend, and not us. Now they're spacefaring species. They're like, what's going on? So they said, they went to a council, the Elder Council, and they said to them, a species is already evolving on our planet called humanity, and we want to be the ones to help humanity, right? So, and really, the species, I think, really was the Sasquatch. At that point, the Sasquatch was on this planet. So they took, so they were given permission by the elder species to go back and to take the Sasquatch and to manipulate its genetic code and turn it into, in order to help it survive a winter. A winter was coming to the planet Earth, what they call it, an ice age. And it was predicted that the Sasquatch would not be able to exist through this through this time period. So what they did was, that was the reason they gave why they wanted to help the Sasquatch, which was one day to become humanity, to evolve it. Now, what they did more than that. And this really begins the story, our story, is what they did was, they manipulated the gene code of humanity and turned it into humanity. But what they didn't change it into what we are now. They genetically modified it to such an extent that it became, and also another thing that they did was they spliced their gene code into humanity. Now there was lots of reasons why they did that. They decided in their society, how they made this decision I'll never know, but they decided that they would go to war. And think of the arrogance of this. It's sheer arrogance. It's arrogance of another proportion. They believed that they were divine, that they were the only divine species. They were arrogant. They felt themselves to be gods. And their reason was this: they're going to share their frequency, their DNA, with humanity, right? So they're going to say that we and they were a very evil race. I'm just going to put it out there. But I stand by this statement also. Evil is not an intrinsic value. It's not an intrinsic thing. It's a created a made thing. It's a created thing. But they created humanity. They gave humanity, they engineered humanity to such an extent that they gave them the perfect nervous system, perfect immune system, I was going to say, really. And what they did also at this period of time, when I say this might be over 1 million years, I'm going to say, they genetically modified humanity over 1 million years, right? But at the same time, what they did was they understood. I know this teaching, I know it strains credulity, but I want you to understand that I can only relate what I believe to be true, and I can only relate the experience as I experienced it, and that's all I'm doing. So, but to me it makes sense. right? Because a little later I'll explain to you why it makes sense. So they genetically modified us. And then what they also did, they understood that there are millions and millions of dimensions which are parallel dimensions. So they said to themselves, well, the Tabapaclassians, they were the Tabapaclassians, but in other dimensions they were also other Tabapaclassians. And they created gateways. This is quite an important point I want to make. They created gateways from this dimension to the other parallel dimensions. What they wanted to do, they wanted to dominate this quadrant of the, I don't know if you call it the solar system, the universe. They wanted to dominate this quadrant. And the elder species were the divine species, the elder species, the ascended species. They were so advanced that really the Tabapaclassians would never stood a chance. They understood that the only way they could do this would be to use to command the might, if you like, of the different parallel dimensions and get all of the resources from those dimensions and channel it through. Now, at the same time that this was happening, humanity had been completely genetically modified, and they were not as we are now. In many senses, you know, they had a higher intellect. They were also split into 5 different species or subspecies, whatever you want to say. There was a master species, the 5th species, the white supremacist, if you like, the white, and then there was the 5 other or 4 other different subspecies of humanity at that time. It was an abomination, really, what the Tabapaclassians done to us. But one of the things that they did is humanity travelled at that point to another world. Another world that inhabited a species that had intelligence but were, they were pre-industrial, that other species, and humanity dominated that world. The elder species decided not to interfere with that because they felt that if one species had the technology to be able to go to the other to get there, it was a natural evolution. Unbeknownst to the elder species, they didn't know that humanity had been genetically modified to the extent that they had, but they soon found out. Actually, they did find out that humanity had been genetically altered to such an extent that they were almost like an artificial species then, by that point. And so what happened was the Watchers, the dreamwalkers, communicated with a species that is almost like, almost like the police, exists in our societies, the law keepers. The universe is a kind of law keeper as well. And this species, I don't know what even to call them, I don't even know names. And if I call them the Tarnassians, or that's the word that came to my mind, I'm going to use it because, it's just a made-up word, but it's something to, define them with. They came and they wiped off the face of the earth, the face of the physical realm, the Tabapaclassians, all in one go. They did it completely. It took about 7 days. That's how quick it was. And they wanted to do that with humanity also, because rightfully they said, well, humanity holds the gene code of the Tabapaclassians in humanity's gene code. So they pointed out that theoretically the Tabapaclassians could use humanity as a host species and re-emerge into the physical realm. So they were like, we want to destroy humanity as well, at that point, that physical. Now the Dreamwalkers said they don't believe that is the right thing to do. the dreamwalkers said that humanity is one of the biggest victims of the Tabapaglacians, because the Tabapaglacians took away our humanity before we could even experience our humanity. That's what the dreamwalkers say. So when people talk about the dreamwalkers, what they call the greys, in such confusion and derogative terms sometimes, the dreamwalkers saved humanity. There's no way of being able to explain it in a different way. They saved humanity. They said that humanity is the biggest victim, and humanity should be saved. That it would be wrong to destroy humanity or wipe it off the physical realm. So the Tanasians, the police of the universe, said, right, okay, but you are responsible, dreamwalkers. You are responsible for humanity. And if humanity comes out into the universe again, there will be no second chances. Because the way the Tanasians look at it, the Tabapaglacians and humanity themselves are one. Right, so then the dreamwalkers then got lots of other species together, and in one they tried to, first of all they tried to stabilise the earth. At the time the earth was experiencing terrible weather phenomenons and also phenomenal stuff, because the Tabapaglacians had used gates to different dimensions and used this on the earth, to use these gates on the earth. So it done a terrible thing to the earth, the physical frequency of the earth. So the extraterrestrials, dreamwalkers, call them dreamwalkers and co. Yeah, right. They stabilized the earth, and then they stabilized humanity's gene code, right? And they tried to revert humanity back and give it its own independence back. That was the idea, to give the independence back. Because humanity was very much, I'm going to say enslaved maybe, but maybe that's the wrong word. They're entangled with the Tabapaglacians. They were very, very tangled. And like I said, really, and this is quite controversial what I'm going to say, there was 5 species of humanity on the earth. And the white race, if you like, of humanity was supposed to be the master race from the Tabapaglacians' viewpoint. That's what they designed that artificial humanity to be. But anyway, we know all that went. That all went. The extraterrestrials come in and then balance the human gene code. So black, white, Asian, whatever you were equal. There was no master species anymore. It was all equal. And in a sense, the dreamwalkers and the elder species felt that they were a little bit responsible for humanity's poor, bad experience of what happened, because they were duped by the Tabapaglacians. But even though they were duped, they very much are the guardians of younger species throughout the cosmos, really. So they felt that they owed us at something, because of this, so what they did was they created on this earth, they created the pyramids, all of this technology, right? Because they knew what the Tabapaglacians had cleverly done is the DNA, when they were artificial, when the humanity was artificial, created, you might say, I'm going to throw this out there, but it's off. I know it's going to be a little bit off, but you get the idea. Maybe humanity had 12 strands of DNA when they were artificial, right? But now this has been stripped away and brought back to what humanity should have been, our DNA, but it is still connected. Think of DNA as a signal. In a denser frequency, because as you know, when I said they destroyed the Tabapaglacians, nothing really gets destroyed in the universe. So the Tabapaclassians they exist now on a denser frequency in the same locality as what the Earth is now. They exist here and now, but on a denser vibration. Right, that's very important to understand. Now, we exist on a higher dimension, on the physical realm, but our DNAs are linked, and this is where the distortion comes from. The Tabapaclassians are actively distorting our experience on this earth. They're still manipulating us from that frequency, and this is what brings David Icke. David Icke was picking up on this all those years ago, and he was quite right to do so. But I think maybe he did something wrong. Yeah, maybe he done something wrong, or misconception. But let's not blame him. In a time in the 80s when everybody was completely and utterly blind to everything. Yeah, he was the light in the darkness. Yeah. He's a bit like John the Baptist was to Jesus. He made the way. He educated people's minds so they could receive the truth, and that's one of the things. But that's another story. But going back onto this, so the Tabapaclassians then are the distortion that we experience on this earth, on this small tiny planet that's in the cosmos. Remember, the distortion is only happening here. It's a localized distortion. It doesn't exist all the way through the universe. It's just that tiny speck here. Now, humanity, what happened then is that the extraterrestrials gave us understanding, gave us wisdom, but also created technologies so that humanity could exist without the distortion. Right. So that happened, and I'm going to give it a time scale between 75,000 years ago to 100,000 years ago. That's when that happened. So I'm going to stick with the 75,000 years ago just to give it an accuracy. Now, but there came a point in which the extraterrestrials had to say, do you know what? We've got to leave humanity to it now. We've given them the support. We've given them the teachings, right? It's up to humanity now to make that universal decision to go into the future, yeah? So, but as time went on, this is one thing. Remember I said it was the white Tabapaclassians had designed 5 species. There was a fragment that was still a residual fragment that managed to keep itself. Somehow it managed to keep itself and the memories of what happened. And they slowly, very carefully began to subjugate humanity. It took a very long time initially, 35,000 years, But basically they did that. And then, over time, now you're coming into... There was a point where somehow humanity that was... Because what happened was, as things grew then, 75,000 years ago, 65,000 years ago, 55,000 years ago, humanity had gone back into space. Right? And there was all sorts of installations and groups on different moons, on Mars, on all these different places. And I'm going to call them for this the off-worlders. So the off-worlders were there. And there came this divide. Because what had happened is that remnant of the Tabapaclassians, the human remnant, in my book Phoenix Rising, I call them the Taba, right? But let's call them, for argument's sake, the Order of the Dragon. Yeah, they had subjugated and taken full control over the Earth at that point. So there was the Earth and there was the off-worlders at that point. We're talking maybe 35,000 years ago, 30,000 years ago, maybe sooner, I don't know. But what happened was, and there was a war. And the off-worlders won the war. Humanity was yeah, they just basically lost the war. You know, the Earth did. The human remnant had subjugated humanity on this Earth. But in a very real sense, humanity at that point had really sort of taken a decision to turn their back on the divine frequency. They had been subjugated so much. But I'm not going to take this away. We made that decision. Now, what happened was, there was terrible cataclysmic effects that happened on the Earth at that point then. And this is where really Atlantis really is a symbol of the last remnants of the higher dimensional human frequency dissolved. The floods came in. Humanity sunk back into tribalism. And then there was then other remnants, there was remnants of technology. Technology was still existing, ancient technology was still existing on the Earth. But the Order of the Dragon then, they began collecting up this technology and hiding it. We're talking about 12,500 years ago. And also, that remnant has also began sort of trying to establish civilization again on the Earth. We're talking about 12,500 years ago. Then, the ancient Judaic, they began trying to keep the semblance of divinity, and also in India, the people that lived there, they were also very advanced, really. And actually, what happened then in that, I call it, it's hard to draw the picture. I'd like to be able to draw a picture and do animations with this, really, to be able to give it more clarity. But you could say that the first cycle, the first eon, if you like, of humanity was when they'd been changed back by the extraterrestrials, and we had our humanity again. That was when, and the extraterrestrials stayed with us, created the technologies, the pyramids and everything to stabilise the distortion so that humanity wouldn't experience it. That was really the first era, the first cycle, the first eon, if you want to call it that one. The second cycle then was where humanity had slowly begun to erode. Over thousands of years, but it began to erode. And in that erosion, off-worlders left the Earth and established bases on the other planets. And they continue to evolve spiritually. So in a very real sense, in this second era, the humans on the Earth plane, on this Earth here, this physical locality, were eroding in a sense, and then the ones on the off-worlders, because they were outside of the distortion field, they were evolving, and then there became this war, and the off-worlders won, because they had higher technology. They actually scorched the sky. They actually helped some of humanity exist in underground installations, because they knew they were going to scorch the sky, and they knew that radiation would be affecting the planet for a long period of time. So they helped humanity that was on Earth, the normal people, you and I, the normal people, to exist through that. And then this is when we're talking about the third era then, when basically everything folded in on itself, and there was like cataclysmic sort of oceans rising, and maybe what we're experiencing now, but back then, maybe humanity had fallen into its ways, of its wayward ways, and didn't care about the ozone layer and all the rest of it, and then the sea rose, and then after that period, then the world began to try actually recreated, come together as a whole. This is in the third era, maybe the first stage on the third era, and there was a global civilization which was getting along. They were doing okay. And then that remnant rose up again, the Order of the Dragon rose up again, and then subverted everything again, because they didn't want to, the Order of the Dragon doesn't want to live in this locality, in this physical locality, without them being the dominant ones. They want to be dominant. They want to dominate. They want to be at the top. So they couldn't exist in a reality where they were equal. So what they done is they destroyed everything on this earth, and then created their own civilization. They took over Egypt to begin with. They waged war on the Minoan society. They destroyed that because the Minoan society at that time was like, basically they were like the traders, and they were looking after all of the basically trade throughout the world. So they destroyed the Minoan civilization, and then they subverted the Egyptian one. They Greece had come up at some point. They subverted that, of course, as well. The Library of Alexandria. They basically got all of the books out of there that they felt was relevant, and then burnt the rest. Yeah, that's what they want. Yeah, that's what they'd be doing throughout society. They're trying to disempower the rest of humanity so that they can take hold of humanity and control humanity, at least on this planet. Then they finally got together. Then this Order of the Dragon created Rome. They took over Rome. They hijacked it. And then they just went into different civilizations then, and they took back their gods, assimilated them in their religions and everything like that, because they knew religion was just a tool to use to manipulate the masses, so they just did that. Then Christianity came along, and they subverted that, and then they used that religion and they just subverted it as, and twisted all of the different sort of, I don't know, Holy Communion, Holy Communion was divine. It's about communicating with the higher spheres. This is what I was talking about. Holy Communion. Communing with that which is holy. I mean, is there any misunderstanding of that? I mean, but for some reason, they and do you know what? The cup, drinking the water from the cup, or the wine from the cup, and the bread. What? How is that Holy Communion? It's a joke. That's what that is. And it's nothing to do with Jesus. It's nothing to do with the Nazerene, our beloved brother. It's nothing to do with that. It's just a subjugation. It's a warping of divine practices, and then warping them into this diabolical rituals. And teaching them to people who are asleep, spiritually. Yeah, and anyway, that's what they're doing there. So Rome then, yeah, a small little tiny little country, took over the world. How does that happen? If there is no Order of the Dragon, do you know what I mean? How would that happen? But anyway, they came to Britain, didn't they? They came to Britain, and they packed up their bags. They shut it all down. They didn't really. They just saved all of the information that they learned over the centuries, and then they just built up the British Empire. I mean, the old sort of British Empire was called Mercia, wasn't it? Mercia, yeah. Mercia. And then they then went to America, or they went to that country that the Native Americans had, or the natives had, dominated it, like they dominated the rest of the world. I mean, talk to Rome, that's what they were. The British Empire wasn't the British Empire, really. It was the Roman Empire, just with a different name. And then they took it to America. They basically done the same. That they packed up everything, collapsed it all, and reinvented it in Britain. And then British Empire, you know what that was. It took over India, took over China, yeah, Australia. Oh my goodness, how can such a small country do that? Well, it all makes sense, doesn't it? If it's the Order of the Dragon. And then they just packed up Britain and went to America. Mercia. America. Mercia. Mercia. They put it right in front of your face, you still can't see it. So they reinvented it, and now they're in America, and they were taking over the world, and they're doing it again. Except the dreamwalkers and co communicated with the Order of the Dragon now. In a sense, I just want you to know this. There was, well, put it this way, I'm just saying that the Order of the Dragon has been told that you will not go into space unless you stop dominating the rest of humanity. We see you, Order of the Dragon. We see what you're doing, and it won't happen. It won't happen. Because remember what the Tanassians had said. If the Tabapaclasia goes into space again, or the human remnant of the Tabapaclasians go into space, we will come and we will destroy humanity. Now, that's just the police of the universe just saying so, but the other extraterrestrials, the dreamwalkers, our protectors, the dreamwalkers, are like, we can't allow you to go into space. It's as simple as that. You will not go into space. Period. Unless. And so from 2013 till now, the Order of the Dragon has taken a back seat. They're still there, but they're just taking a back seat. Isn't it strange as well? You know those people, I'm just on about, what was it, Jimmy Savile? You know what I mean? All these paedophiles and things like that were doing it on a large scale. Epstein and all of that. They've been taken down. And it's going to continue to roll that way. That's why I feel so excited that they're going to take down all of the evil. Because the Order of the Dragon is no longer protecting those which are evil. They're just, because they've got to take a back seat. So now the rest of humanity, the good part of humanity, is raising its head up and going, what's going on over there? I don't think that's right. Let's grab him and chuck him in jail. And they're doing something about it now because they can. Because the Order of the Dragon is taking a back seat. And that's the beauty of it. That's why I've come out and say what I'm doing, mind, over the internet. Because I know that that's happened. You see? You catch my drift. I needed to tell you all about that history. Make of it what you want. Read my books if you want. It's just me. Like I said, it's just me trying to do the best that I can. Try to bring clarity where there's not clarity. I'm trying to bring clarity. I'm trying to be the small candle in the cathedral of darkness. Just trying to shine that light. And that's what I've been trying to do. I wanted to give you the history to make it clear exactly what's happening, and the origin. I wanted to give you an explanation about the origin of why humanity experiences the distortion. It's because the Tabapaclasian species that are in a denser frequency are still influencing humanity. They don't want humanity to be an ascended species. They want to rebel. And in one sense, the old Judaic religion about the fallen angels, about their rebellion, is basically the story of the Tabapaclasians, because really the angelic kingdom of what they call angels, really they're elder species. They're extraterrestrial, interdimensional beings. So that's exactly what's happening. And the fallen angels also, that's basically what it is. You see, because the Tabapaclasians, they had the option. They had an option to go along the path and become ascendant, and to continue to be a great and positive influence. But they turned away from that. They turned away from that divine heritage and said, no, we are gods and we will dominate everybody else. And but when you look at when you look at the face of it, you might go, well, what a load of rubbish that is, Craig. I mean, where on earth did you get that from? Oh my goodness, oh my. Right? You could go with that. And that's fair enough. But my question to that is, look at humanity's history, even recent history. I mean, I've got memories from the Holocaust, from being in the Holocaust, spiritual memories that I don't want to relive. But sometimes I have to relive them a little bit, because it gives me lucidity, really. Because basically, the Nazis, there is another history here now as we're coming forward. I want to bring this, as I know this is such a long video, but it's so necessary. And it's very ambitious of me to do this video. Um, but basically, in 1882, I think it was 1882. I think I might be wrong, slightly out on the years. But basically, the age of Aquarius came in. Now, those who were spiritual had spiritual understanding, and there has been lots of beings, people through the ages, that have on the side of light, if you like. They understood. They understood also about, there was a guy, and I forget his name. I've got it written down somewhere. But basically, it doesn't really matter about names anyway, does it? In a sense, maybe it does if we wanted to do the research. There was a guy that said that he'd measured the length and breadth of the pyramids, and he'd said that basically in 1882, this was about 1845. He said basically in 1882, there was going to be the end of the world. By the measurements of the pyramids and the calculations that he had done, he thought that 1882 was going to be the end of the world. Now, 1882 came along. I think he said this in maybe in 1862. And then when that 1882 came along, everybody laughed at him. Oh, it's the end of the world, is it? Oh my goodness, oh my God, how come we're not dead? They were like really taking the mick out of him. The scientists at the time as well took the mick out of him, made fun of him. That's what I'm saying. And actually, I watched a video recently when it was the science videos were talking about him back in the day and laughing now. They're laughing at him still. But I'm actually like, he was right. I tell you why he was right. Because in 1882, the age of Aquarius came in, right? Now, there were two major things happened to mark it. The Theosophy Society was born. Helen Blavatsky knew about the awakening time cycle, yeah, and she was bringing in a lot of truth, yeah, bringing together a lot of people, educating people. A woman in 1882 doing this would have been and that's how powerful she was as a spiritual being. She could do it as a woman in Victorian times. That's something. To being a woman in this time and doing something, is hard enough. But actually doing it back in 1882, phenomenal, right? Also, Aleister Crowley was born in 1882. I'm speaking off the top of my head, by the way, but I feel I'm around the right period as well. So, and also, what this guy had said about the pyramids around 1882, he said there was going to be a revolution. Well, everybody's looking around them in 1882 going, well, where's the revolution? So they were laughing at him. But in fact, the revolution is that the actual, if you want to call them this, the powers of darkness, if you like. The powers of darkness, yeah. I don't really like that term, the powers of darkness. It's more like, I don't know, I'm going to call it the power of the red, really. The evil, the power of those that are in the darkness, that are deep within the darkness, that are in the throes of the Order of the Dragon, realised that humanity was going to be waking up in the Aquarian age. So they needed to really do something, because in actual fact, some of this history has been wiped off the planet right now. It's been subverted because actually there was a great awakening between 1882 and 1904. There was a great awakening happening, and further, all the way through this age, there's been awakenings. So the Order of the Dragon said, we've got to do something now. So what they done was, one of the things that they done was I'm going to be very brief here. There's a lot more into it, but they basically created World War One. Yeah, the revolt. Yeah, they created, using the banking system, American banking system. Well, they created the Great Depression. Yeah, they orchestrated. The Order of the Dragon orchestrated Hitler. Yeah, they took one galloping approach to dominate the earth, all in one swoop. Yeah. Shock and awe. They were the original creators of shock and awe. It was like, we're going to do it, and we're going to do it now. And I just want to understand this. Yeah, I think we can all understand. We can all appreciate this. I think they came within a gnat's. They came within a fraction of. They almost succeeded. I just want to sink that in. They almost succeeded. I mean, if you ever watched that program, wasn't it, Man in a High Castle, isn't it? You know that they almost did it, and I want that to sink in. When you look at the Holocaust, and you look at all of that that's happened, you also look at the stuff that was done in China. This is not. This has been submerged. This has been a corruption of this. Well, no, when we come out of the corruption, right? So in 1932, the Japanese went into China. They went into a Nanking, and the atrocities that they did within 6 months has never been paralleled in all of human history, and yet nobody knows about it. Only a few know about it. It's there. Study it. Read the book, The Rape of Nanking. You probably can't read it. It's too awful because it's too true. And but also coupled with that as well, and also the Holocaust. Yeah, I think we need to, we need to understand it. Now, a lot of the people, I think, in this day and age, that experience social anxiety, yeah, and all of those anxieties, depression, that's experiencing now. There's two reasons why that's happening. Number one, I think throughout the internet, Quoria, was it the website? I was looking for it because I got an account with them, and I was looking through all of the different posts, and I've got different, one thing that I belong to is English literature on there, and grammar and punctuation, but also history, and all these different. But it's so depressing. I mean, every single story, no matter where you go on there, it's depression, 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 depression. And I'm like, they're using it, that maybe the Order of the Dragon, or the people that are in the governments and everything. I don't know why they're doing it. I think I know why they're doing it. They're doing it because humanity is galloping at the moment and becoming awake. And they're trying to slow that down a bit because they're not ready for it. And so they're trying to slow it down, and they're trying to slow it down by depression and thoughts and stories after stories after stories. The narratives of war, war, war. Don't look at the news. Don't look at the internet. I mean, if you have to, just glance at it. Take the picture in, turn it off. Because they're controlling the narrative, and they're controlling your perception. Perceive from within. Yeah? Be very careful of what you see in the world at the moment, because it's trying to slow your evolution down on an individual level, but also as a nation. Whether you be Americans or British or French or whatever, they're doing it, and this is. So that's something I wanted to talk about, and I wanted to give. Now that story that I gave you, it goes more into depth. And I'll be quite frank, carrying this knowledge with me has been quite difficult in some sense. I want to share it, because when I had that, because one of the things that we experience, the enlightened experience, you can look at it sometimes, you can go, well, that just might be their imaginations. There's all kinds of reasons why people can have these internal experiences, and that they can be real experiences but have no relationship to what actually is in reality and stuff like that. I might be talking about in the future the nature of reality, and that's where we have to discuss it. We have to discuss what we're talking about when someone says something's real and when something's not. Well, like I said, I mean, am I existing inside my house now, or is the house existing within me? You know what I mean? What is the nature of consciousness, and what is the nature of reality? And I actually think the nature of reality and the nature of consciousness are probably the same thing. Yeah? That actually all of this is where I sort of think that I do also think that humanity, even though it's experienced what it's experienced, I think we're quite a special species, because I think we've been altered at a very early stage, but we're still here, and we're still fighting, and we're still living, and we are going to ascend. We are going to, because remember, I think we've got three natures within us. We've got the original divine nature, which is in the heart of all things. And I wanted to talk about this as well, that within the heart of every being is a Christos. Understand that within the heart, whether it be animal, plant, whether it be human, whether it be extraterrestrial, whatever and wherever, if it has form, it has a Christos. That's a big statement, I know, but it has a centre of its being. Now, there's some people who are exploring the idea of that this is a matrix, and they're getting the idea that there are people called NPCs, and they're saying that these people are not really human, that they're just a matrix, and that they're not really human. And I'm like, I understand why they come into that conclusion, and there's all different reasons. But understand this: Hitler thought that some people weren't really human. He thought that some people were inhuman or subhuman, and look what happened there. Yeah, I think you've got to be very careful in saying that they're just I don't know, some sort of circuitry or something, some sort of, I don't know, just a signal or something without real consciousness, that they're just a human being that looks like a human being, but they're not really a human being. I'm like, no. They're human beings. The Christos may be buried deep within that being, It may be hard. They are totally, totally unconscious. Oh, don't get me wrong, that's true. You know what I mean? And it is up to all of us to try and awaken those individuals, And many are not going to awaken, And many will. And I'm really talking to the people who are awake now, because if you're an NPC listening to me at the moment, you will not make heads or tail of what I'm saying. I say not an NPC, isn't it? But there's no such thing as an NPC. But if the Christos within you, the light within you, is so buried in your darkness, then you're gonna. One of the signs that is the case is you not understanding anything that I'm saying and thinking I'm speaking gobbledygook. But the enlightened will understand what I'm saying. They may disagree on certain points or whatever, but this is why I'm saying I'm just a man. I'm just a human being trying to understand those messages. And the messages and the experiences I've had are experiences that I've had as an individual, but also I think they're meaningful for the human race also. I really do believe that. And I get a sort of, so I'm just going to leave that now, I think. Let you make of it what you will. Yeah, because you can't make a decision unless you've got the data. I just thought I'd share those experiences with you. But whoever you are and wherever you are, God bless you, and understand the sincerity of my communication. And if you doubt my sincerity, when I talked about the Nazerene, let me talk to you about the Nazerene. You know what I'm saying? Let me talk to you about the Nazerene and about this light. Let me talk to you about that. It's real. More real than anything else. The light of a Nazerene. Beautiful. From the height of the tower of light to the very height of it, his love has been felt. And his love has transformed and touched every being from the bottom of the tower of reality to the highest point of the tower of reality. Deny not our beloved brother, because I'm here to say that he's true, but I'm not here to say about many other things of the Bible and the truth of that. That's for you to make up your own mind. But if you want to see a piece of work, a piece of writing that is actually divinely inspired, read the Gospel of St. John. Another book which is quite really, really good to read, just incidentally, is the book White the yeah, I think I'm going to leave it at that. God bless you and keep you safe. Goodbye.